The Dust Devils danced across the main street of Dust Creek, Arizona territory, as Clara Mitchell swept the porch of the general store for the third time that day. It was a futile effort. The red earth had a way of claiming everything in this forsaken corner of the world, coating windows, filling lungs, and settling into the creases of weathered faces. But Clara swept anyway, her calloused hands gripping the worn handle as if the repetitive motion could sweep away more than just dirt. At 19, Clara had already lived a lifetime of hardship. Her mother had died of consumption when Clara was barely 14, leaving her alone in a town that had little use for orphaned girls with no dowry and too much pride. The good people of Dust Creek tolerated her presence the way they tolerated tumbleweeds, as an inevitable nuisance of frontier life. She worked odd jobs, mending clothes for the saloon girls, cleaning the schoolhouse, helping Mrs. Henderson with laundry when her arthritis acted up. It was honest work, but in the eyes of the townspeople, she remained that peculiar Mitchell girl who refused to know her place. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, turning the ramshackle wooden buildings into ovens. Paint peeled from storefronts like dead skin, and the few horses tied to hitching posts stood with their heads low, tails swishing at persistent flies. Clara paused in her sweeping to wipe sweat from her brow, her faded calico dress clinging to her back. That's when she noticed the commotion near the sheriff's office. A crowd had gathered, their voices carrying on the hot wind. Clara recognized most of them. Tom Garrett, the blacksmith whose breath always stank of whiskey. Judge Whitmore, whose righteous demeanor masked a fondness for gambling, and several of the town's more prominent ranchers. At the center stood Sheriff Dawson, his badge glinting in the harsh light as he gestured emphatically, 3 of Morrison's best horses, gone in the night. The sheriff was saying, "That's $600 of horseflesh, vanished like smoke." Clara edged closer, curiosity overcoming caution. Horse theft was a hanging offense in the territory, and Sam Morrison was not a man to cross. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres east of town, and his influence reached even further. Must have been someone who knew the layout. Morrison himself growled, his weathered face darker than usual beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Someone local?" The crowd murmured agreement, and Clara felt the familiar prickle of unease that came when the town's collective anger needed a target. She'd seen it before, when the Wells family's crops failed. They blamed the Mexican workers, when the bank was robbed last spring. Suspicion fell on every drifter within 50 miles. Justice in Dust Creek was swift and often wrong. "What about that Mitchell girl?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Hartley, the banker's wife, whose sharp tongue was as legendary as her husband's tight fist. "She's been seen near the Morrison spread, hasn't she? Collecting those herbs of hers." Clara's blood ran cold. She did gather wild herbs near the creek that bordered Morrison's land, sagebrush for stomach ailments, desert marigold for wounds. It was knowledge her mother had passed down, one of the few inheritances she'd left behind. "Now, hold on." Sheriff Dawson raised a hand, though his expressions showed he was considering the suggestion. "We can't just—" "Can't we?" Tom Garrett spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Girl's got no family, no prospects. Probably figures she's owed something by the world. I seen her there myself, 2 days past." Another voice chimed in. Clara recognized Walter Hayes, a ranch hand who'd made unwelcome advances toward her more than once. Acting mighty suspicious, if you ask me. The crowd's energy shifted, coalescing around this new theory like iron filings to a magnet. Clara knew she should run, should disappear before— There she is! Too late. "Mrs. Hartley's finger pointed directly at Clara, and suddenly all eyes were upon her. She stood frozen, the broom still clutched in her hands, as the crowd surged forward. "I didn't steal anything," Clara said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I was gathering herbs for—" "Save your lies for the devil." Morrison cut her off, his hand already reaching for the rope coiled at his saddle. "Sheriff, do your duty." Sheriff Dawson looked uncomfortable but moved forward anyway. "Clara Mitchell, you're under arrest for the theft of—" This is madness! Clara's fear transformed into anger. You have no proof, no evidence except the word of people who've hated me since. Walter Hayes grabbed her arm roughly, and she swung the broom at him instinctively. It connected with his shoulder, and he cursed, backhanding her across the face. Clara tasted blood as she stumbled, the broom clattering away. Assaulting an officer of the law now, too, Judge Whitmore intoned, though Walter Hayes held no such position. The evidence is clear enough for me. What followed was not a trial, but a theatrical performance. They dragged Clara to the small courthouse, where Judge Whitmore presided over a mockery of justice that lasted less than 20 minutes. No one spoke in her defense. The few who might have, Mrs. Henderson, perhaps, or the schoolteacher, Miss Davis, remained silent, eyes downcast. Clara Mitchell, Judge Whitmore announced, his voice carrying the weight of false authority. For the crimes of theft and assault, this court sentences you to be bound at sunset and left to the judgment of the Almighty. If you survive the night, your innocence will be proven. If not, he shrugged, the gesture more eloquent than words. You can't do this, Clara said, but even she knew the futility of protest. Frontier justice had its own rules, written in blood and enforced by men who confused power with righteousness. They bound her hands with rough rope that cut into her wrists and loaded her onto a wagon like a sack of grain. The crowd followed, some out of bloodlust, others from mere curiosity. Clara kept her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of tears. The procession moved beyond the town limits as the sun began its descent toward the jagged horizon. The landscape here was unforgiving, red rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth, sparse vegetation clinging to life in the sandy soil. They stopped at a dead cottonwood tree, its bleached trunk a monument to the desert's cruelty. Last chance to confess, Morrison said, though his tone suggested he hoped she wouldn't. Clara looked him in the eye. I have nothing to confess, but you, all of you, will have to live with what you're doing. They tied her to the tree as the sun painted the sky in shades of blood and fire. The rope was expertly knotted, tight enough to prevent escape, but not so tight as to kill her outright. That would come later. From exposure, thirst, or the creatures that hunted in darkness. As the townspeople mounted their horses and wagons, Mrs. Hartley called out with false piety, "We'll pray for your soul, dear." "Pray for your own," Clara shot back, earning a final blow from Walter Hayes before Sheriff Dawson pulled him away. Then they were gone, the dust of their departure settling as the sun sank lower. Clara tested her bonds, but they held firm. Already, the temperature was dropping, and she could hear the first tentative yips of coyotes in the distance. The sunset was beautiful in its terrible way, turning the desert into a canvas of impossible colors. But Clara knew that when that beauty faded, when the last light died beyond the mountains, the real trial would begin. She closed her eyes, not in prayer but in preparation, steeling herself for the long night ahead. In the growing darkness, a different sound carried on the wind, the soft clip-clop of hooves, moving with deliberate care. Clara's eyes snapped open, hope and fear warring in her chest. But the rider, whoever they were, remained hidden in the gathering shadows, watching and waiting as the last rays of sunlight surrendered to the night. The ropes bit deeper into Clara's wrists as she struggled against them, each movement sending sharp pain up her arms. The cottonwood's rough bark scraped against her back through the thin fabric of her dress. She'd been testing her bonds for what felt like hours, though the moon's position suggested less time had passed. Her fingers had gone numb. Whether from the rope's pressure or the desert's growing cold, she couldn't tell. The temperature had plummeted with the sun's departure. The same desert that had been a furnace mere hours ago now felt like an icebox, the kind of bone-deep cold that made her mother's final days flash through her memory. Clara pushed the thought away. She needed her wits, not sentiment. A coyote's howl pierced the darkness, closer than before. Another answered from the opposite direction, then a third. They were circling, patient predators who knew wounded prey when they scented it. Clara's throat constricted with fear, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic would only hasten her end. The moon had risen full and bright, transforming the landscape into an alien world of silver and shadow. Every scraggly bush became a crouching beast. Every whisper of wind through the rocks sounded like approaching danger. Clara's eyes strained against the darkness, searching for the telltale green gleam of animal eyes. She tried calling out once, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. "Is anyone there? Please!" But the desert swallowed her words, returning only the rustle of nocturnal creatures beginning their hunt. She wouldn't waste her strength calling again. If there was truly a rider out there, they'd already heard her. The rope around her wrists had loosened slightly from her struggles, but not enough. Blood made her skin slippery, but the knots held firm. Tom Garrett might be a drunk, but he knew his rope work. Clara bit back a sob of frustration, channeling her despair into anger. She would not give them the satisfaction of finding her corpse tear-stained come morning. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision. Clara's heart hammered as she turned her head, expecting to see the low-slung form of a coyote. Instead, a figure emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, tall, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in dangerous places. The moonlight caught the barrel of a rifle slung across his back and the worn leather of his duster coat. He approached slowly, his spurs making soft music with each step. Clara held her breath as he came into clearer view. The stranger wore his hat low, casting his face in shadow, but she could see the glint of eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He stopped just outside of lunging distance, a man who knew better than to trust desperation. For a long moment, neither spoke. Clara lifted her chin, summoning what dignity she could while tied to a tree like a sacrifice. The stranger tilted his head, and moonlight finally caught his features, sharp cheekbones, a jaw roughened by several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that seemed to hold their own light, pale and cold as winter stars. "Left bound to die at dusk," he said finally, his voice low and rough as gravel. "Who did this to you?" "The good people of Dusk Creek," Clara replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "They needed someone to blame for stolen horses. I was convenient." He moved closer, and Clara caught the scent of leather, gunpowder, and something wild, like sage after rain. His hands went to the knife at his belt, the blade appearing with fluid ease. Clara tensed, uncertain whether she'd traded one death for another. "Hold still," he commanded, though not unkindly. The blade sliced through the ropes with 2 efficient cuts. Clara's arms fell to her sides, pins and needles shooting through her limbs as blood flow returned. She stumbled, knees buckling, and the stranger caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Can you ride?" he asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. He whistled low, and a horse materialized from the darkness, a black gelding that looked built for speed and endurance. The stranger shrugged out of his duster and draped it around Clara's shoulders. The coat still held his body heat, and she pulled it tight, shivering with relief as much as cold. "They'll come back," Clara said. "Dawn, probably, to see if I survived." A smile played at the corner of his mouth, though it held no warmth. "Then we'd best not be here." He helped her mount behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist by necessity. Clara had ridden before, but never like this, pressed against a stranger in the darkness, fleeing toward an uncertain future. The horse moved sure-footed through the treacherous terrain, guided by its rider's expert hand. "Why?" Clara asked as they rode, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why help me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried across the night wind. "Maybe I don't like seeing innocent folk left for the coyotes. Maybe I've got my own grudge against Dusk Creek. Or maybe—" He glanced back, and she caught that unsettling smile again. "Maybe I just couldn't resist playing the hero for a pretty girl." "I don't need a hero," Clara said, though her arms tightened around him as the horse navigated a particularly steep descent. Just a way out of this territory." "Fair enough," he said. "Though in my experience, one usually requires the other." They rode in silence after that, the desert passing in a blur of moonlit rock and shadow. Clara's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Where was he taking her? What price would he expect for his rescue? But exhaustion was winning over curiosity, the events of the day catching up to her in a crushing wave. She must have dozed, because suddenly they were stopping, the horse's movement ceasing so smoothly she barely stirred. They were in a narrow canyon, walls of red rock rising on either side. The stranger dismounted and helped her down, leading her to a small overhang that formed a natural shelter. "We'll rest here until dawn," he said, already gathering dried brush for a fire. "Too dangerous to ride these canyons in full dark." Clara watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way his hands never strayed far from his weapons. When the fire crackled to life, she held her hands toward the flames, feeling life return to her frozen fingers. "You haven't asked my name," she said. He settled across from her, the fire painting dancing shadows across his face. Names have a way of complicating things. "Clara," she said anyway. "Clara Mitchell." He studied her for a moment, then touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mockery or respect. "Well, Miss Clara Mitchell, you can call me Jake, though depending on who's asking, I've been known to go by other names. You're an outlaw." It wasn't a question. "Among other things." He pulled a canteen from his saddlebags and passed it to her. "Drink slow." The water was warm and tasted of metal, but Clara had never tasted anything so sweet. She forced herself to take small sips, though her body screamed for more. Jake produced some dried beef and hardtack, the meager meal feeling like a feast after her ordeal. "What will you do now?" he asked, watching her eat with those pale eyes. "Family elsewhere? Friends who might take you in?" Clara shook her head. "My mother's buried in Dusk Creek. Never knew my father. As for friends," she gestured at her bound wrists, the rope burn still raw and bleeding. "You saw how many spoke for me today? Then you're free," Jake said simply. "No ties, no obligations. Some might call that a curse. Others," he gazed into the fire, "others might call it a gift." Clara wanted to ask what he called it, but his expression had closed off, shuddering whatever thoughts lay behind those winter eyes. "Instead," she asked, "what's your grudge with Dusk Creek?" His smile was sharp as his knife blade. "Let's just say Morrison and I have a history. His horses going missing wasn't the first interesting thing to happen on his ranch lately." Understanding dawned. "You took them, the horses." "Borrowed," Jake corrected. "They're already sold to a buyer in Mexico who asks fewer questions. Morrison can afford the loss. He's taken more than 3 horses worth from folks who couldn't." Clara knew she should feel outraged, sitting across from the actual thief while she'd nearly died for his crime. Instead, she felt a dark satisfaction. Morrison had stood there watching as they tied her to that tree, righteous in his false conviction. "Does that bother you?" Jake asked, reading her silence. "Breaking bread with a horse thief?" "I'm beginning to think," Clara said slowly, "that the law and justice parted ways a long time ago in these parts. Now you're learning." He stood, checking his weapons with practiced ease. "Get some rest. We've got hard riding tomorrow if we want to stay ahead of your former neighbors." Clara curled up near the fire, Jake's duster still wrapped around her. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the company of a confessed outlaw, she felt safer than she had in years. As sleep pulled at her consciousness, she heard Jake settling against a rock, positioning himself between her and the canyon entrance. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Mitchell," came the quiet reply. "This story's just beginning." The canyon walls glowed crimson in the early morning light as they broke camp. Clara had slept fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, expecting to see the vengeful faces of Dusk Creek's citizens, but each time, she'd found Jake keeping watch, a silent sentinel against the dying embers of their fire. They rode through landscapes that seemed torn from the pages of a fever dream. The canyon opened into a maze of red rock formations, wind carved into impossible shapes, arches that framed the sky, pillars that stood like ancient sentinels, and narrow passages that forced them to ride single file. Jake navigated with the confidence of someone who had used these routes before, choosing paths that would confuse any pursuers. By midday, the sun had transformed their rocky corridor into a furnace. Sweat soaked through Clara's dress, and Jake's borrowed duster became unbearable. She shrugged it off, tying it to the saddle, and immediately missed its protection as the sun attacked her exposed arms. "There!" Jake pointed to a cluster of cottonwoods in the distance, their green a shocking contrast to the red earth. Water. The spring was small but clear, bubbling up from rocks to form a pool before disappearing again into the thirsty ground. They dismounted, and Clara didn't wait for permission before kneeling and plunging her face into the cool water. She drank deeply, then splashed her face and neck, washing away the dust and fear sweat of the previous day. When she looked up, Jake was watching her with an unreadable expression. He'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature silver. In the harsh daylight, she could see lines around his eyes, not from age, but from squinting against sun and wind, from nights spent watching for danger. "You're staring," he said. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Just wondering about you, a man who saves strangers but steals horses. The world's not as simple as they taught you in Sunday school, Miss Mitchell." He filled the canteens while his horse drank. "Morrison's horses will feed families in Mexico. Your life," he shrugged, "seemed worth more than their need to feel righteous." "And what's your story?" Clara pressed. "Jake's not your real name, is it?" His smile was crooked. "Real as any other I've used. You want my history? Born in Missouri. Father died in the war. Mother remarried a man with hard fists and harder drinking. Left home at 15, learned to shoot, learned to survive. The rest," he gestured vaguely, "is just variations on a theme." "You were a bounty hunter," Clara said, remembering his words from the night before. "For a time, good money in bringing men to justice." His expression darkened. "Until you realize justice is just another word for whoever's paying. Brought in a man once. Turned out his only crime was loving a rancher's daughter. The rancher wanted him gone, so he invented a crime, put up a bounty. What happened? I brought him in." Jake's voice was flat. "They hanged him the next day. The girl took poison a week later." He stood abruptly. "We should move." They followed the spring's hidden course through a valley dotted with sage and rabbit brush. Here and there, Clara spotted bones. Cattle, she thought, though some looked older. Stranger. The desert kept its own museum of death, bleached monuments to everything that had tried and failed to survive here. "You know plants," Jake observed, watching her gather some flowering herbs near the stream. "My mother taught me. Desert marigold for wounds. Brittlebush for pain." She held up a sprig of purple flowers. "Desert lupine, poisonous if you eat it, but crushed and mixed with fat. It keeps infection away. Useful knowledge out here." It didn't save her. Clara said quietly, "All the herbs in the desert couldn't cure consumption." They rode in companionable silence after that, the landscape gradually shifting from red rock to gray granite. By late afternoon, they'd climbed into higher country, where juniper and piñon pine offered blessed shade. Jake called a halt in a grove where ancient trees formed a natural shelter. "We'll stop here for the night," he announced. "Good sight lines, multiple escape routes if needed." Clara slid from the horse, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Every muscle ached from the unaccustomed riding. Jake noticed her discomfort and wordlessly began setting up camp, giving her time to recover. "I can help," she protested. "You can barely stand. Sit." It was an order, but not unkindly given. She watched him work, noting the careful way he positioned their bedrolls, the strategic placement of his rifle, the thorough check of his pistols. Everything spoke of a man who lived with constant danger. "How long have you been running?" she asked. Jake paused in building the fire. Who says I'm running? Everything about you, the way you watch the horizon, check your weapons, choose camps for defense rather than comfort. Observant. He struck flint to steel, coaxing flames from dry pine needles. 3 years, more or less. Made some enemies in my bounty hunting days. Man named Samuel Thorne took exception to me bringing in his brother. Was the brother guilty? As sin, robbed a stage, shot the driver and a passenger. But family's family, and Thorne's got a long memory and deep pockets. Put a bounty on me. Ironic. Really. The hunter becomes the hunted. The fire crackled to life as shadows lengthened around them. Jake produced more provisions from his saddlebags, this time including a small sack of coffee that made Clara moan with appreciation when she smelled it brewing. So we're both exiles, she said, accepting the tin cup gratefully, cast out by those who claim righteousness. Differences. I earned my exile. You were just convenient. Clara sipped the bitter coffee, feeling it warm her from within. Maybe I was always going to end up outside their world. My mother used to say I had too much wildness in me for town life. Too many questions, too much pride. Pride's not a sin when it's all you've got. A coyote howled in the distance, and Clara shivered despite the fire's warmth. Jake noticed and moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence like a shield. They won't track us this far, he said. Morrison's men are ranch hands, not trackers. They'll search the obvious routes, find nothing, and decide you died in the desert. Easier for everyone that way. And then you disappear. Become someone else. Somewhere else. It's not a bad life. Being a ghost? Clara studied his profile in the firelight. Is that what you are? A ghost? Among other things? That crooked smile again. Though I'd say you're handling the company of specters pretty well. She laughed, surprising herself. 24 hours ago, she'd been facing death, and here she was sharing coffee with an outlaw in the wilderness. My mother always said I had poor judgment in companions. Smart woman. She would have liked you, Clara said, then wondered why she'd said it. She appreciated honesty, even when it came wrapped in questionable packages. Jake turned to look at her fully, those pale eyes catching the firelight. And what do you appreciate? Clara Mitchell? The question hung between them like a challenge. Clara felt something shift in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the man sitting inches away. Right now, she met his gaze steadily. I appreciate being alive, being free, having choices, even if they're all dangerous ones. Freedom's always dangerous, Jake said softly. It's the cages that feel safe. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and its mate answered. The desert night was closing in around them, but for once, Clara didn't fear it. She was outside civilization's bounds now, in the wild spaces where different rules applied. Tell me about Mexico, she said, wanting to preserve this strange peace between them. Have you been there? Jake leaned back against a log, his expression softening. Many times. It's a different world. Colors so bright they hurt your eyes. Music in the streets. Food that burns your tongue and makes you beg for more. In the right places. Nobody asks about your past, only your money. It sounds like paradise. Every paradise has its serpents. But for someone starting over, he glanced at her. You could do worse. Plenty of Americans have made new lives down there. Clara pulled her knees to her chest, imagining it. A place where nobody knew her name, her history, her mother's death or father's absence. Where she could be whoever she chose to be. What's stopping you from going there? She asked. If Thorne's men are hunting you here. Jake's expression closed off again. Unfinished business, a debt to settle before I can leave with a clear conscience. Clara wanted to ask more, but his tone suggested that door was closed. Instead, she watched the fire and let the desert night settle around them like a blanket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, she was alive and free, sharing warmth and coffee with a dangerous man who'd shown her unexpected kindness. We should sleep, Jake said finally. Long ride tomorrow. He banked the fire and took up his position against a tree, rifle across his knees. Clara curled into her bedroll, Jake's duster once again serving as her blanket. Despite everything, she felt her eyes growing heavy. Jake, she called softly. Whatever your unfinished business is, be careful. She heard him shift in the darkness. Get some rest. Clara, let tomorrow's troubles wait for tomorrow. But as sleep finally claimed her, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's troubles were already racing toward them through the darkness, swift and inexorable as the desert wind. Dawn came like a warning, painting the eastern sky the color of fresh blood. Clara woke to find Jake already saddling his horse, his movements quick and economical. The relaxed manner of the previous evening had vanished, replaced by a tension that made her stomach clench. "What is it?" she asked, quickly rolling up her bedding. Dust cloud, maybe 3 miles back. He didn't look at her, focused on checking his weapons. Could be nothing. Could be vaqueros heading to market. Could be Morrison's men. Or worse. He helped her mount, then swung up in front of her. "Hold tight. We're going to ride hard." They plunged down the mountainside at a pace that made Clara's heart pound. Jake's horse picked its way through the treacherous terrain with surprising agility, but she could feel the animal's muscles bunching with effort. Behind them, she caught glimpses of the dust cloud whenever they crested a ridge, definitely closer than before. The landscape opened into a vast valley dotted with towering saguaro cacti, their arms raised like surrendering giants. "Here." Jake pushed the horse into a full gallop, Clara clinging to his waist as the ground blurred beneath them. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the valley into a furnace. "There," Jake pointed to a line of green in the distance. "Another river canyon. We can lose them in the narrows." But as they approached the canyon mouth, Jake suddenly reined in hard, the horse sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust. Fresh tracks marked the sandy entrance, at least 5 riders, heading in the same direction they needed to go. Jake swore creatively. Ambush, maybe, or just bad luck. He wheeled the horse around, studying their options. The dust cloud behind was definitely closer now, and Clara could make out individual riders. 6, maybe 7. "Jake, I see them." His voice was calm, but she felt the tension in his body. "All right, Miss Mitchell. Time to see what you're made of." He dismounted and pulled her down after him, leading the horse into a cluster of rocks that formed a natural fortification. His rifle was in his hands before she could blink, and he tossed her his spare pistol. "You know how to use this?" Clara hefted the weapon, surprised by its weight. "Point and pull the trigger." Despite everything, he grinned. "Close enough, but only if they get past me. Understand? And aim for the body, bigger target." The riders were visible now without the dust to hide them. Clara's heart sank as she recognized several faces. Walter Hayes rode at the front, his face twisted with determination. Beside him was Tom Garrett and 3 men she didn't know, rough-looking characters with the bearing of hired guns. "Morrison must really want his horses back," Jake murmured, sighting down his rifle. "That's not about horses," Clara said. "That's about me making them look foolish." The riders had spotted them, spreading out in a half-circle as they approached. Jake fired a warning shot that kicked up dust at the lead horse's feet. The animal reared, nearly unseating Hayes. "That's far enough, boys," Jake called out. "Turn around and nobody has to bleed today." "We want the girl," Hayes shouted back. "She's a condemned thief. You're harboring a fugitive, mister." "Funny thing about that," Jake replied conversationally, though his rifle never wavered. "See, I happened to be in the vicinity of Morrison's ranch 3 nights ago. Real clear night. Good moon. And I can tell you for certain Miss Mitchell wasn't anywhere near those horses." "You saying you saw who took them?" Garrett called out. "Suspicious." Jake's grin was sharp. "I'm saying I've got real good eyesight." Understanding dawned on Hayes's face. You're the one who—" Jake's shot cut him off, the bullet singing past Hayes's ear close enough to draw blood. "Next one won't miss. The girl's innocent. I'm the thief you want, but you're not taking either of us. There's 6 of us. 1 of you, one of the hired guns pointed out. True. Jake worked the rifle's lever, the sound sharp in the morning air. But I'll drop at least 3 before you reach us. Starting with you, friend. Question is, which 3 want to die for Morrison's horses? Clara watched the men exchange glances, saw uncertainty creep into their postures. These weren't lawmen driven by duty. They were ranch hands and mercenaries, in it for the money. Death wasn't part of their bargain. There's a bounty on you, Garrett said suddenly. Jake Holloway, $2,000, dead or alive, Thorne's money. Clara felt Jake tense beside her. So that was his full name, Jake Holloway. It suited him somehow. Speaking of empty places and hard roads. Thorne's welcome to try collecting, Jake said. But that's between him and me. You boys want to die for another man's grudge? What about our grudge? Hayes snarled. That girl made fools of us all. Judge Whitmore, Sheriff Dawson, the whole town knows we were played. You played yourselves. Clara found her voice. Anger overcoming fear. You were so eager to blame someone, anyone, that you nearly killed an innocent woman. The only fools in Dust Creek are the ones who call themselves righteous. Hayes' face darkened. You lying witch! Jake's rifle barked again, and Hayes' hat flew off his head. The lady's talking. Mind your manners. But Clara wasn't finished. My mother died in your town, and not one of you lifted a finger to help. I scrubbed your floors, mended your clothes, tended your sick, and you treated me like dirt under your boots. And when you needed someone to blame, I was easy, wasn't I? No family, no friends, no one to speak for me. Clara, Jake warned quietly, but she shook her head. No, they need to hear this. She stepped out from behind the rocks, Jake's pistol steady in her hands. You want to know the truth? I'm glad someone took Morrison's horses. I'm glad you look like fools, and I'm glad to be free of that festering sore you call a town. You admit it then, Garrett said eagerly. You were in on it. I admit nothing except the truth, that Dust Creek is full of cowards and hypocrites who hide behind the law when it suits them and ignore it when it doesn't. One of the hired guns shifted his weight, hand moving toward his weapon, and Jake's rifle swung toward him instantly. Don't even think it. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could hear her heartbeat, could smell the fear sweat on men and horses alike. The sun climbed higher, shadows shortening, offering less cover. Then, unexpectedly, one of the hired guns laughed. $2,000 ain't worth dying in this heat. I'm out. He turned his horse and started back the way they'd come. Yellow Belly! Hayes shouted after him, but another mercenary was already following. Garrett, do something! But Tom Garrett was studying Jake with the careful eyes of a man who'd survived too many years on the frontier to die for pride. Morrison's horses are already in Mexico by now. The girl... He spat tobacco juice. Maybe we were hasty. You can't be serious, Hayes protested. After everything, we're standing in the desert facing down a man who survived 3 years with Thorne's bounty on his head. Garrett's voice was thoughtful. That takes some doing. And if he says the girl's innocent, then maybe you should have asked for proof before you tried to kill me, Clara said bitterly. Garrett had the grace to look ashamed. Maybe so. He turned his horse. Come on, Hayes. It's over. It's not over. Hayes reached for his gun, desperation making him reckless. Jake's rifle spoke first, the bullet catching Hayes in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, clutching his wound and moaning. The remaining hired gun immediately raised his hands. I got no quarrel with you. Holloway, just here for the pay. Then earn it by taking trash back where it belongs, Jake said, gesturing at Hayes. And tell Morrison his horses are gone. Tell Sheriff Dawson the real thief confessed. Tell them all that Clara Mitchell is under my protection now, and I've got a long memory for those who wrong innocent folk. The hired gun dismounted and helped Hayes back onto his horse, the wounded man cursing and threatening through his pain. Garrett watched it all with tired eyes. For what it's worth, Miss Mitchell, he said finally. Your mother was a good woman. Maybe we should have remembered that sooner. Then they were gone, dust settling in their wake. Clara found herself trembling, the pistol suddenly too heavy for her hands. Jake took it gently, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. You did good, he murmured against her hair. Stupid, but good. I couldn't let them, she broke off, overwhelmed by delayed reaction. I know. He held her until the shaking stopped, then stepped back. All business again. We need to move. They'll be back with more men, or Thorne's people will hear about this. Either way, this country just got too hot for us. They mounted quickly, Jake choosing a different route that skirted the canyon. As they rode, Clara looked back once at the battlefield. Already, the desert was reclaiming it, wind erasing hoofprints, sun bleaching away the violence. Jake Holloway, she said as they rode. Your real name, real as any other. He replied, though I'd appreciate you forgetting you heard it. Names have power out here. What happens now? They know you took the horses, they know your name. They knew before, or suspected. This just confirms it. He guided them into a wash that would hide their passage. As for what happens now, that depends on you. Clara Mitchell, where do you want to go? The question hung between them like a door opening onto infinite possibilities. Behind lay Dust Creek and everything she'd known, pain, loss, small-minded cruelty. Ahead stretched the unknown, dangerous but free. South, she said firmly. Mexico, like you said. Somewhere nobody knows my name or my past. Jake nodded, something like approval in his eyes. It's a hard road, harder still for a woman alone. The implication hung in the air. Clara gathered her courage. I don't suppose you'd consider... if you're heading that way anyway. He was quiet so long she thought she'd overstepped. Then, my business here isn't finished. There are debts to be paid, accounts to balance. It could get ugly. Uglier than being tied to a tree and left for dead. That startled a laugh out of him. Point taken. He considered. All right, Clara Mitchell, we'll ride together for now. See where the trail takes us. But I make no promises beyond that. I'm not asking for any, Clara said, though her heart beat faster at the thought of not facing the unknown alone. Partners? Partners, Jake agreed. Though you may regret it before we're done. As they rode deeper into the wild country, Clara thought about regret, about her mother's death, her father's absence, the town that had cast her out. She'd carried those regrets like stones, weighing her down. But now, riding with an outlaw under the vast Arizona sky, she felt lighter than she had in years. Whatever came next, she would face it with eyes open and head high. The girl who'd swept porches in Dust Creek was gone, left behind like shed skin. In her place rode someone new, someone harder, perhaps, but also freer. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and they rode on into the shimmering heat. Two outcasts bound by circumstance and choice, writing their own law in the lawless land. The sun had reached its merciless peak when Jake finally called a halt. They'd been pushing hard for hours, following a twisted path through arroyos and over ridges that left Clara dizzy with heat and exhaustion. Her throat felt like sand, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. Down here, Jake said, guiding his horse into a narrow cleft between two massive boulders. The temperature dropped instantly in the shade, and Clara nearly sobbed with relief. Jake helped her dismount, steadying her when her legs buckled. He pressed his canteen into her hands without comment, then began checking the horse for signs of strain. We can't keep running like this, Clara said when she could speak again. The horse will die if we push much harder. Jake finished grimly. I know, but Hayes won't give up easy, and word travels fast out here. By nightfall, every bounty hunter within 50 miles will know where I was spotted. He pulled his saddlebags down and extracted a folded paper, spreading it on a flat rock. It was a map, hand-drawn and marked with symbols Clara didn't recognize. We're here. He pointed to a spot that meant nothing to her. Dust Creek's back here. Mexico's still 4 days' ride, maybe 5 with the horse in this condition. What about towns? Somewhere we could get supplies, maybe trade for fresh mounts? Jake's finger traced a line to a small mark on the map. Perdition. It's not exactly a town. More like a collection of people who don't want to be found. No law, no questions asked if you can pay. Sounds perfect. Sounds like a good place to get killed. Jake corrected. But we might not have a choice. There's a man there who owes me a favor. Maybe he can help. They rested until the worst heat passed, sharing the last of their water and dried meat. Clara dozed fitfully against a rock, jerking awake when Jake touched her shoulder. Storm coming, he said, pointing to the western horizon where dark clouds were building. We need to find better shelter. The air had changed, carrying the metallic scent of rain and lightning. Wind kicked up dust devils that danced across their path like diminutive tornadoes. Jake's horse tossed its head nervously, sensing the approaching weather. They found what they needed just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, a shallow cave carved into a hillside by centuries of flash floods. Jake led the horse inside just as the sky opened up, releasing a deluge that turned the world gray. Desert storms, Jake said, watching the water cascade past their shelter. Beautiful and deadly, like most things out here. Clara moved deeper into the cave, grateful for its protection but aware of how it trapped them. If someone tracked them here. She pushed the thought away, one danger at a time. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the rock around them. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, white flashes, revealing a world transformed by water. What had been dust was now mud. What had been dry washes were now raging torrents. At least it'll wash out our tracks, Clara said, trying to find something positive. And Morrison's men won't ride in this. Jake had removed his hat, water dripping from his hair. Small mercies. They built a small fire from debris washed into the cave by previous floods. The smoke was a risk, but the storm would hide it, and they needed warmth. Wet clothes in the desert night could kill as surely as bullets. Tell me about Perdition, Clara said, huddling close to the flames. What kind of favor does this man owe you? Jake was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. His name's Moses Elkhorn. Used to ride with a gang that robbed a military payroll. Things went bad. Soldiers shot most of them. Moses took a bullet in the gut, left for dead. You saved him? Found him crawling through the desert, more dead than alive. Could have turned him in for the bounty, but... Jake shrugged. Something about shooting a defenseless man didn't sit right, even one with a price on his head. Patched him up. Let him go. And now he runs some kind of business in a town with no law? Last I heard, he deals in horses, doesn't ask where they come from, doesn't care where they go. Useful man for someone in my profession. Clara studied Jake's profile in the firelight. Every story he told revealed another layer, another glimpse of the man beneath the outlaw exterior. A bounty hunter who couldn't shoot a wounded man, a thief who rescued innocent women. The contradictions should have troubled her, but instead, they made him more real, more human. What? He asked, catching her stare. Just thinking about choices. Clara said, the ones that lead us to moments like this. Regrets. No. She surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. Whatever happens, it's better than dying tied to a tree, or living the slow death of a life in Dust Creek. The storm raged on, turning afternoon into premature twilight. They shared what food remained, careful not to touch, an awareness growing between them that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with proximity. Clara found herself noticing details, the way firelight caught in his pale eyes, the careful grace of his movements, the rare moments when his guard dropped and something vulnerable showed through. After Perdition, she said to break the tension. What then? Will you come to Mexico? Jake added wood to the fire, taking his time answering, depends on what we find there. If Moses can help us disappear clean, maybe. If not, he met her eyes. You might be better off on your own. My past has a way of catching up. Hour passed. Clara corrected. I'm wanted too now. Escaped prisoner. Possible horse thief accomplice. We're both ghosts now. Remember? There are ghosts and there are ghosts. Yours might fade with time and distance. Mine. He touched his chest where Clara glimpsed the edge of an old scar. Some marks don't wash off. The rain began to slacken as suddenly as it had started. Typical of desert storms. Jake moved to the cave mouth, scanning the transformed landscape. Water still ran in sheets off the rocks, but the violence had passed. We'll move at first light, he decided. The wet ground will make tracking harder, but also travel. It'll be slow going. Jake! Clara joined him at the entrance, the cool air raising goosebumps on her skin. What happens if they catch us? Morrison's men or Thorne's? He glanced at her, something fierce in his expression. They won't take you, that's a promise. I'm not asking you to die for me, and I'm not planning to. But Clara, he turned to face her fully. You need to understand something. Out here, there are rules. A man's word is his bond. I said you were under my protection, and I meant it. That's not something I take lightly. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. You barely know me. Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Maybe because I'm tired of seeing the strong prey on the weak. Maybe because you remind me of someone I couldn't save. Or maybe... He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maybe I just wanted to do one thing right before my luck runs out. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She wanted to touch him, to offer comfort for whatever ghosts haunted him. But she held back. This thing between them was fragile as spun glass, too new and uncertain to test. Instead, she said, your luck's held for 3 years. Don't bet against it now. From your lips to God's ears. He moved back to the fire. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Clara settled near the fire, using her bundled dress as a pillow. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the proximity of a man she barely knew but was beginning to trust, she felt safer than she had in years. The storm had washed the world clean, and tomorrow they would ride into whatever fate awaited them. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Jake moving around the cave, checking approaches, always vigilant. His presence was a comfort, a steady assurance that she wasn't alone in this vast, hostile world. Jake, she called softly. Yeah, thank you, for everything. She heard him settle against the cave wall, rifle across his knees as always. Save your thanks for Mexico. Clara, we're not there yet. But as Clara finally surrendered to exhaustion, she thought it wasn't Mexico she was grateful for. It was this, the unexpected grace of finding someone who saw her truly, who offered protection without trying to cage her, who understood what it meant to be outside the law's protection but not outside human kindness. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on ancient stone. Outside, water still dripped from rocks, the desert drinking deep of the rare gift. And in a cave that had sheltered countless travelers over countless years, 2 outcasts kept watch over each other through the long, uncertain night. Tomorrow would bring perdition, with all its dangers and possibilities. But tonight, they had shelter, warmth, and the fragile beginning of something that might, against all odds, see them through to safety in the lawless lands of the Arizona Territory. Sometimes that was as close to a miracle as anyone could hope for. Perdition announced itself with the smell of horses and gunpowder long before they saw it. The town, if it could be called that, huddled in a box canyon like a secret shame, its ramshackle buildings clinging to the rocky slopes. No church steeple marked its presence. No school bell rang the hours. This was a place for those who'd fallen through the cracks of civilization. Stay close, Jake murmured as they rode down the narrow trail. Don't meet anyone's eyes directly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Let me handle the talking. Clara nodded, pulling the brim of Jake's spare hat lower. They'd stopped at an abandoned homestead that morning where she'd found men's clothes that almost fit, canvas pants, a faded shirt, suspenders to hold it all in place. with her hair tucked up and dust covering everything. She might pass for a young man at a distance. It was safer that way, Jake had said, and she'd seen the wisdom in his caution. The main street was barely more than a widened gulch, buildings carved from the canyon walls or built from scavenged lumber. Men lounged in doorways, watching with the lazy attention of predators well-fed but always alert for opportunity. Clara spotted at least a dozen guns in plain view, probably twice that hidden. Jake stopped outside a long, low building with a crude sign. Horses trade. No questions. A Mexican boy took their mount's reins, eyes widening slightly at the horse's quality, but smart enough to say nothing. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the earthy smell of hay. Horses stood in rough-hewn stalls, their brands telling stories of distant ranches and hasty departures. At a desk made from a door laid across two barrels sat a massive black man, his head as hairless as a river stone, a livid scar running from his left ear to his collar. "Moses," Jake said simply. The man looked up, his eyes widening slightly before settling into careful neutrality. "Jake Holloway. Heard you were dead." "Heard wrong." Moses leaned back, his chair creaking ominously. "Also heard you've been busy. Morrison's horses caused quite a stir. And now you're riding with—" His eyes flicked to Clara, seeing through her disguise instantly. "Interesting company. I need fresh horses, too, and supplies for a week's ride." "That's a lot of need." Moses steepled his fingers. "What makes you think I'm inclined to help?" Jake stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his gun. "Guadalupe Pass, 3 years ago. Ring any bells?" Moses was quiet for a long moment, then laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "Always did know when to call in a debt." "All right, Holloway, but it'll cost more than old gratitude. Thorne's raised the bounty, 3,000 now, and he's hired professionals. They were through here 2 days ago." Clara felt her stomach tighten. Professional bounty hunters were a different breed from ranch hands seeking easy money. "How many?" Jake asked. 4, led by Silas Creed. Even Clara recognized that name. Creed was legendary, a former Pinkerton who'd turned freelance, known for always bringing in his quarry, usually dead. Jake's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hand tighten imperceptibly. "Then we'll need those horses sooner rather than later." Moses stood, revealing his full, impressive height. "Wait here, and Holloway, whatever you're planning, make it quick. Perdition's neutral ground, but that won't last if Creed decides the rules don't apply." He disappeared into the back, leaving them alone among the restless horses. Clara moved closer to Jake, keeping her voice low. $3,000. That's a fortune. Thorne's got fortunes to spare." Jake's eyes never stopped scanning the room. Railroad money, cattle empire. His brother was scum, but family's family. And Creed is very good at what he does. Jake met her eyes. "If you want out, now's the time. Moses could probably arrange safe passage for you. Different direction." "You don't have to—" "We're partners," Clara interrupted. "I'm not running now." Something flickered in Jake's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. Before he could respond, Moses returned, beckoning them to follow. They passed through a maze of connected buildings, some carved from rock, others built in defiance of gravity. Finally, they emerged in a hidden corral where 2 horses waited, a bay mare and a spotted gelding, both showing the lean strength of desert breeding. "Apache horses," Moses explained. "Ugly as sin, but they'll run forever on a handful of grain and spite. Supplies are in the saddlebags." Jake inspected the animals with an expert eye, then nodded. "What's the price?" "The black mare you rode in on, plus a favor owed." Moses smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Someday I might need to call in a debt of my own." "Done." Jake didn't hesitate. They transferred their few possessions quickly. Clara noticed Moses had included extra ammunition, dried food, full water skins, and medical supplies. Preparing for a siege, not just a journey. "There's something else," Moses said quietly. Creed was asking about a woman. Young, pretty, recently disappeared from Dust Creek. Seems Morrison's put up his own reward, $500 for her return. Alive. Clara felt cold despite the afternoon heat. They really can't stand being made fools of. It's not about that anymore, Jake said grimly. It's about power, control. They let one person defy them. Others might get ideas. Moses walked them to a hidden exit, a narrow crack in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for horses. This leads north, then curves back south after 2 miles. Harder tracking on the rock. Creed's good, but he's not supernatural. As they prepared to leave, Moses caught Jake's arm. That girl you couldn't save. Rebecca, wasn't it? Thorne's brother's victim? Jake went very still. What about her? Just wondering if this is about justice or revenge. Man should know which fuel he's burning. Maybe it's both. Jake's voice was flat. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. Moses released him. It always matters. Watch your back. Holloway. And you. He looked at Clara. Watch his... Man like him needs someone to remind him he's human. They rode in silence through the narrow passage. Clara processing what she'd learned. Rebecca. Another piece of Jake's puzzle. Another ghost driving him through the desert. She wanted to ask, but the set of his shoulders warned against it. The passage opened onto a plateau of scattered juniper and ancient lava flows. Jake led them at a steady pace, choosing paths that would leave little sign. As the sun began its descent, he finally spoke. Rebecca Thorne, Samuel's daughter. She fell in love with a drifter, Mexican boy named Carlos. Samuel didn't approve. Wrong blood, wrong class, wrong everything. So he framed the boy for rustling, put a bounty on him. Clara waited, sensing more. I tracked Carlos for 2 weeks, brought him in. He swore he was innocent, begged me to listen, but the money was good, and I figured that was for courts to decide. Jake's laugh was bitter. They hanged him the next morning. Rebecca took laudanum that night, left a note explaining everything. The truth about her father's lies, about Carlos's innocence, about their plans to elope. It wasn't your fault, Clara said softly. Wasn't it? I was the instrument of injustice, my hands on the rope, even if I wasn't the one who tied the noose. He reined in suddenly, dismounting to check something in the dirt. That's when I quit bounty hunting. But Thorne blamed me for Rebecca's death, said if I hadn't brought Carlos in, she'd still be alive. Put the first bounty on my head a month later. And you've been running ever since. Jake remounted, his expression unreadable. Running, planning, waiting for the right moment. He looked at her. You still sure you want to ride with me? This isn't your fight. Clara thought about Moses's words, about watching Jake's back, reminding him he was human. Maybe not, but Dust Creek became my fight the moment they tied me to that tree. Different injustice, same blindness. Besides, she managed a smile. Partners don't abandon each other. They made camp as darkness fell, choosing a spot among lava rocks that offered protection and concealment. No fire tonight, too risky with Creed somewhere behind them. They ate cold biscuits and jerky, sharing water in the intimate darkness. Tell me about Mexico, Clara said, needing to fill the silence with something besides fear. What will you do there? Haven't thought that far ahead, Jake admitted. Hard to plan a future when you're not sure you'll see next week. Then I'll plan for both of us, Clara said firmly. A small ranch, maybe, somewhere in the mountains. Horses, not cattle. I've had enough of cattlemen. Someplace green, with water that runs year-round. Sounds nice. His voice was gentle in the darkness. What else? A garden, proper vegetables, not just what grows wild. And books. I miss reading. My mother had 3 books. Read them so often I memorized them. She lay back, looking up at stars. What would you want? Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Peace, he said finally. Just peace, to sleep without one eye open, to see a rider on the horizon and not reach for iron, to build something instead of always tearing down. Clara's hand found his in the darkness, A brief squeeze of understanding. Then that's what we'll find. Peace, a place to build instead of run. You believe that? I have to. She pulled her blanket closer. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Jake didn't answer, but his hand lingered near hers, almost touching, a promise or a prayer in the desert night. Around them, the ancient rocks stood sentinel, carved by wind and time into shapes that would outlast all human struggles. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, Creed's relentless pursuit, the harsh miles between them and safety. But tonight, in this small circle of warmth and companionship, they carved out their own space of peace, fragile as a soap bubble, but no less real for its transience. Clara dozed fitfully, starting awake at every sound. Each time, she found Jake alert, watching the darkness with pale eyes that seemed to gather all available light. His presence was reassurance enough to let her drift back to uneasy sleep, trusting him to stand between her and whatever hunted them through the night. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time's passage in their ancient dance, and somewhere in the darkness, drawing ever closer, Silas Creed followed their trail with the patience of a man who knew that, in the end, the desert always claimed its due. The news reached them at a waterhole just after dawn, carried by a Mexican trader heading north with a string of mules. Jake had approached cautiously, rifle ready, but the old man showed no fear, just the weathered calm of someone who'd survived by minding his own business. "Senor, you ride fast." "No?" The trader's English was broken, but clear. "Men in perdition. They talk. The sheriff from Dusk Creek. He catch the real ladron, horse thief, young man named William Garrett, nephew of Tom Garrett." Clara felt her heart skip. "They caught him? You're certain?" Senorita, the boy. He tried to sell horses in Socorro. Still had Morrison brand? Very stupid." "No?" The trader spat. "They say he confess everything, take horses for gambling debt." Jake handed the man a silver dollar. "What else are they saying?" "The town. They feel, how you say, shame. They won't forget what they do to the senorita. But," he glanced at Clara with sympathy, "Morrison, he still offer reward. His pride, it is wounded." After the trader moved on, they sat in silence by the waterhole, processing this news. Clara should have felt vindicated, but instead, she felt hollow. The truth had come too late, changed nothing. She was still an outcast, still hunted. "Tom Garrett's nephew," she said finally. "He was one of the voices calling for my blood, his own family. Family betrays easier than strangers sometimes." Jake said, "They know where you're softest." They were preparing to leave when Jake suddenly tensed, his hand going to his rifle. "Horses, coming fast." Clara heard them now, multiple riders, pushing hard. Jake was already moving, leading their mounts into a cluster of cottonwoods. They'd barely concealed themselves when 4 riders thundered past, dust clouding the air. Through the leaves, Clara caught a glimpse of the lead rider, a thin man with silver hair, dressed in black despite the heat, Silas Creed. His face was angular, aesthetic like a medieval saint, but his eyes were flat as a snake's. "They're ahead of us now," Clara whispered after the riders passed. "And riding too fast," Jake observed. "Creed's making mistakes. He thinks we're running scared, not thinking. That gives us an edge." They waited another hour before moving, Jake choosing a different route that wound through broken country. The Apache horses proved their worth, picking their way through terrain that would have defeated ordinary mounts. By midday, they'd reached higher ground, a maze of sandstone formations carved by wind into fantastic shapes. Jake called a halt at a natural fortress of red rock, its entrance hidden by a screen of juniper. "We'll rest the horses," he said. But Clara heard what he didn't say. They needed a defensive position. The space inside was larger than expected, worn smooth by centuries of wind. Ancient pottery shards littered one corner, and charcoal marks on the walls suggested they weren't the first to seek shelter here. "Indian ruins," Jake said, running his fingers over the faded marks. "Probably Anasazi. They lived here before the Apache, before anyone." Clara explored deeper into the chamber, finding a narrow crack that served as a second exit. Good, they wouldn't be trapped. When she returned, Jake was cleaning his weapons with a methodical care. "Teach me," she said suddenly. "More than just point and shoot. If we're partners, I need to be useful in a fight." Jake looked up, considering. Then he handed her his spare pistol. "All right, first lesson, it's not about speed, it's about smooth. Smooth is fast, fast is clumsy." He showed her how to draw, how to sight, how to squeeze rather than jerk the trigger. Clara's hands were steady. Years of detailed work had given her that. But the weight of the weapon, the knowledge of its purpose, made her stomach tight. "You're thinking too much," Jake said, adjusting her grip. "In a fight, thinking kills. You act on instinct, muscle memory. That's why we practice." They worked until Clara's arm ached and her shots consistently hit the makeshift target Jake had set up. Not perfect, but better. Good enough to make a difference. "Maybe. You're a quick study," Jake said with approval. "Most people take weeks to shoot that well." "I had a good teacher." Clara holstered the pistol, feeling its weight differently now, less foreign, more like a tool. "Jake, what happens after Mexico? When we're safe?" He was quiet, reloading his rifle with careful precision. "Haven't thought that far ahead. Liar." The word came out gentle, not accusation, but observation. "You think about everything, plan every angle. So what happens with us?" Jake finally looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "What do you want to happen?" It was Clara's turn to be silent. What did she want? This thing between them had grown from desperate alliance to something deeper, but neither had put words to it. Out here, feelings were luxury they couldn't afford. "I want," she began, but stopped as Jake held up his hand. Voices, distant but clear in the desert air. Jake moved to the entrance, peering through the junipers. His curse was soft but vehement. "Morrison's here, with about a dozen men." He turned to Clara. "They've joined up with Creed. Must have met on the trail." Clara's mouth went dry. That many men, including a professional tracker. Their chances had just gotten much worse. "There's something else," Jake said, his voice strange. "Samuel Thorne is with them." Clara saw the change in Jake's posture, the sudden tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with old hatred. This was no longer just about escape. This was the confrontation he'd been moving toward for 3 years. "We can still run," she said quietly. "The back exit. No." The word was flat. Final. "I'm done running from him." "Jake, take the horses out the back," he said, not looking at her. "Head south, hard as you can ride. Cross the border at—" "No." Clara's voice was just as flat. "Partners, remember? We stand together or not at all." He turned then, conflict clear in his eyes. "Clara, this isn't your fight. Thorne wants me, not you. Morrison might let you go if—" "If I betray you, turn you over like Judas for 30 pieces of silver?" Clara laughed, but it was sharp-edged. "You saved my life. More than that, you gave me back my dignity, my freedom. You think I'd throw that away now? This is different. Creed doesn't miss, and Thorne killed his daughter as surely as if he'd given her the laudanum himself." Clara checked her pistol, Jake's lessons fresh in her mind. Men like him, like Morrison, they destroy lives and call it righteousness. Maybe it's time someone called them to account. Jake stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her close, kissing her forehead with surprising tenderness. "Brave, stubborn woman. You'll likely get us both killed." "Maybe," Clara agreed, her heart racing from more than fear. "But we'll go down fighting. Together." The voices were getting closer. Jake moved with sudden decision, positioning himself at the entrance while directing Clara to cover the back exit. "They'll try to flush us out, probably with promises of mercy. Don't believe them. Morrison wants you silenced, and Thorne—" "Holloway!" The voice echoed off the rocks, cultured and cold. "I know you're in there. Let's end this like civilized men." Jake laughed, the sound carrying clearly. "Civilized? That's rich coming from you, Thorne. How civilized was it to frame an innocent boy? to drive your own daughter to death. You killed her." Thorne's composure cracked, pain and rage bleeding through. "If you'd minded your own business, if I'd minded my own business, Carlos would still be alive and Rebecca would be happy in Mexico. You killed them both with your pride and prejudice." "Enough talk." This was Morrison, impatient as always. "We've got you outnumbered 15-2. Surrender the girl and we might let you live long enough for a trial." "Here's a counteroffer," Jake called back. "You turn around, right away, and I won't put a bullet through Thorne's heart the moment he shows himself." Clara heard movement outside, men spreading out, looking for other entrances. She pressed herself against the rock, pistol ready, Jake's words echoing. Smooth, not fast. The attack came suddenly. Gunfire erupted at the main entrance, Jake's rifle answering with measured precision. Clara heard a scream. Someone hit, then footsteps at her position. A figure silhouetted against the crack. She fired without thinking, the pistol bucking in her hand. The man stumbled back with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Clara felt sick but held her position, watching for others. "Good shot," Jake called, never stopping his steady fire. "Keep them honest back there." The battle settled into a siege. Morrison's men had cover behind rocks, but so did Jake and Clara. Every attempt to rush their position met with accurate fire. Clara lost track of time, her world narrowing to the crack of rifles, the smell of powder, the weight of the gun in her hand. Then, sudden silence. Jake held up a hand, warning her to stay alert. A white cloth appeared on a stick. "Parley, what do you want? Thorne?" Jake's voice was steady despite the exhaustion Clara could hear underneath. "Single combat. You and me. Winner walks away. Loser—" Thorne didn't need to finish. "And Clara? The girl goes free. You have my word." Jake was quiet, considering. Clara wanted to scream at him not to trust Thorne's word, but she held her tongue. This was Jake's decision, his demon to face. "Your word's worth less than dust," Jake finally said. "But I'll make you a deal, single combat. But if I win, you call off the bounty, all of it, and Morrison forgets Clara exists." Murmured consultation outside. Then, agreed. Jake turned to Clara. "Whatever happens, you ride south, fast as you can. Jake, promise me." His eyes bored into hers. "This is the only way. Promise." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but nodded. "I promise." Jake squeezed her shoulder, then stepped into the open. Samuel Thorne waited in a cleared circle, coat discarded, gun holstered. He was older than Jake, hair gray at the temples, but his hand was steady and his eyes were cold as winter. "Rebecca loved that boy," Thorne said quietly. "Did you know that?" "Really loved him." "I know," Jake replied. "I also know you couldn't stand the thought of Mexican blood mixing with yours. Your pride killed her. Thorne. Not me. Perhaps. But you'll do for revenge." They stood facing each other in the ancient way, hands hovering near their guns. Clara held her breath, time stretching like molten glass. A hawk cried overhead, the sound sharp in the stillness. Then, movement too fast to follow, the crack of gunshots. So close they sounded as one. Jake spun, clutching his side, but stayed on his feet. Thorne took a step back, looking surprised at the spreading red stain on his chest. "Fast," Thorne said, almost conversational. "Faster than I expected." He dropped to his knees. "Rebecca, forgive." He fell forward and didn't move again. Jake swayed, and Clara rushed to him, catching him before he could fall. Blood seeped between his fingers, but his eyes were clear. "Just a graze," he said, though Clara could see it was more. "We need to go. Morrison won't honor a dead man's word." She looked at the circled men, saw Morrison's face twisted with frustration, Creed watching with professional interest. They wouldn't attack immediately. The rules of single combat were sacred even among outlaws, but that wouldn't last. "Can you ride?" Clara asked. "Do I have a choice?" She helped him to the horses, aware of every watching eye. No one moved to stop them, the ancient code holding for these few precious moments. but she could feel the tension building. Knew that the moment they cleared the rocks, the chase would resume. As they mounted, Creed called out, "This isn't over. Holloway, 3,000 is still 3,000. Then you'll have to earn it." Jake replied through gritted teeth. They rode hard. Clara leading Jake's horse when he swayed in the saddle. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the world in shades of blood. Behind them, dust rose as their pursuers mounted up. But they had a lead, and Clara had a destination now. A hidden canyon Jake had mentioned, with a spring and shelter. Only 2 hours' ride. If they could reach it, if Jake's wound wasn't too bad, if their luck held, too many ifs. But as Clara urged the horses faster, feeling Jake's weight against her back when he leaned forward, she pushed doubt aside. They'd survived this long against impossible odds. They'd survive this too. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving. But somewhere beyond the horizon lay Mexico and freedom. All they had to do was stay ahead of the devils behind them and trust in each other. Partners, she'd said. Through everything, she meant it. The hidden canyon was exactly where Jake had promised, a narrow gash in the earth concealed by a fall of rocks and twisted mesquite. Clara had to dismount and lead the horses through single file, supporting Jake as he stumbled alongside. His face was gray with pain, the blood stain spreading despite the rough bandage she'd fashioned from torn petticoat. Inside, the canyon widened into a sheltered grove of cottonwoods surrounding a small spring. Ancient fire rings showed others had found sanctuary here over the years. Clara helped Jake to a flat stone near the water, then quickly unsaddled the horses and gathered wood for a fire. The sun had set, and their pursuers would have to wait for dawn to track them through the rocky approach. "Let me see," she said, kneeling beside Jake with water and the medical supplies Moses had included. The wound was worse than Jake had admitted. The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his ribs, cracking at least one, but it had passed through clean, no fragments remaining. Clara cleaned it carefully, trying not to let her hands shake as Jake bit down on a leather strap to muffle any sound. "You'll live," she said, wrapping fresh bandages tight. "But you need rest, real rest, not just a few hours." "Can't." Jake's voice was hoarse. "Creed will find this place by noon tomorrow. We have to keep moving." "Then you'll die in the saddle, and where will that leave me?" Clara's fear sharpened into anger. "You stubborn fool, you can barely sit up." "Despite everything," Jake smiled. "That's the first time you've cursed at me. It won't be the last if you don't listen to reason." She helped him lie back against the rocks, covering him with a blanket. "Sleep. I'll keep watch." "Clara, don't argue. For once in your life, trust someone else to handle things." Jake caught her hand as she started to rise. "I do trust you, more than I've trusted anyone in years." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "If something happens, nothing will happen," Clara said firmly, though her heart raced at his touch. "Now rest." She took position at the canyon entrance, Jake's rifle across her knees. The desert night came alive around her, rustling creatures, distant coyote calls, the whisper of wind through stone. Every sound made her tense, but gradually she learned to distinguish normal from dangerous. Hours passed. Clara found herself thinking about her mother, wondering what she'd make of this situation. Margaret Mitchell had been a proper woman, educated back east before circumstances brought her to Arizona. She'd tried to raise Clara as a lady despite their poverty. What would she think of her daughter now, dressed in men's clothes, armed, fleeing through the wilderness with an outlaw? She'd understand. Clara whispered to the stars. She knew about making hard choices. Near midnight, Jake stirred, fever making him restless. Clara bathed his face with cool water, whispering soothing nonsense until he settled. His skin was too hot, the wound angry-looking despite her care. They needed proper medical help, but the nearest town that might provide it was across the border. A sound made her freeze, horses, picking their way carefully through the darkness. Clara's hands tightened on the rifle. Then she heard a familiar voice, speaking Spanish in soothing tones to the animals. The Mexican trader from the waterhole. She almost called out, then remembered Jake's lessons about trust. Instead, she waited until the old man appeared in the canyon entrance, hands visible and empty. "Señorita," he said softly, "I mean no harm, but the men who follow you, they make camp 5 miles back. I think maybe you need help. No? Why would you help us?" Clara kept the rifle steady. The trader shrugged. "Maybe because I too have been hunted. Maybe because the young señor paid me well. Or maybe—" his weathered face cracked into a smile. "Because I am old and romantic, and I see how you look at each other." Despite everything, Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's hurt, needs medicine." "See, I think so." The trader produced a leather pouch from his serape. "My wife, she was curandera, healer. These herbs, they fight infection, bring down fever." Clara accepted the pouch gratefully, recognizing some of the plants from her mother's teachings. As she prepared the medicine, the trader examined Jake with gentle hands. "The wound is not so bad, but the fever—" He shook his head. "You cannot ride far like this. We have to— Creed! Ah, the hunter." The trader spat. "I know different way. Harder road but shorter. Through Comanche Wash to the border. 1 day's ride if you push hard." Comanche Wash? Clara had heard the name, always spoken with fear. "Sip, very dangerous. The rocks there, they play tricks. Many men enter, few leave, but I know the true path." He met her eyes. "You trust me?" Clara looked at Jake, burning with fever, then at the kind face of this stranger who'd appeared like a guardian angel. "Sometimes you had to have faith. Tell me the way." The trader drew a map in the dirt, marking landmarks and warnings. "Start before dawn. Follow the white rocks, never the red. When you see the skull of the bull, turn east. The wash will try to lead you south. Do not follow. East until you find the Mary Stone, then south to the border." Mary Stone? You will know it, like the Virgin, holding her child. He stood, pressing a small wooden cross into her hands. "For luck, and remember, in the wash, trust nothing your eyes tell you. The desert spirits play games there." After he left, Clara gave Jake the herbal mixture, forcing him to drink despite his weak protests. Within an hour, his fever had broken, sweat soaking through his clothes. She held him as he shivered, whispering prayers and promises into the darkness. "Don't leave me," Jake muttered, still caught between sleep and waking. "Never," Clara promised, pressing her lips to his burning forehead. "We're getting out of this together." Before dawn, she had the horses saddled and Jake tied into his saddle. He was conscious but weak, in no condition to ride alone. Clara mounted behind him, arms around his waist to keep him steady, and turned toward Comanche Wash. The entrance was unmarked, just a gap between white boulders that seemed too narrow for horses, but they squeezed through, entering a landscape that defied logic. Rocks balanced impossibly, shadows fell the wrong direction, and sounds echoed from nowhere. "Stay with me," Clara whispered, as much to herself as Jake. "Just stay with me." The wash twisted and turned, offering false paths at every junction. Clara followed the trader's directions religiously. White rocks, never red. The sun climbed, heat reflecting off stone until the air shimmered like water. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about Rebecca, about Mexico, about Clara. Then she saw it, the skull of a massive bull, bleached white and wedged between 2 pillars of stone. East. She turned the horses, though every instinct screamed that east led to a dead end. The path narrowed until the horses' sides scraped stone. Clara's heart pounded as the walls seemed to close in. Then, suddenly, they emerged into a wider canyon, and there, impossibly, stood the Mary Stone, a natural rock formation that looked exactly like a robed woman cradling an infant. "South," Clara breathed. "Almost there. Jake, almost there." Behind them, she heard echoes, voices, maybe, or just the wash playing its tricks. It didn't matter. They were committed now, racing against time and Jake's fading strength. The border appeared as nothing more than a wooden sign, weathered and full of bullet holes. Mexico. But to Clara, it might as well have been the gates of paradise. She urged the horses across, not stopping until they reached a cluster of adobe buildings, a small village drowsing in the afternoon heat. "Ayuda!" Clara called out. "Por favor, ayuda!" People emerged, women in bright skirts, men in wide sombreros, children peering from doorways. They took in the scene, the wounded American, the desperate woman, the founder horses, and responded with immediate compassion. Strong hands lifted Jake down, carried him to a small house where an ancient woman waited, already preparing her healing supplies. Clara tried to follow, but gentle hands held her back. "Let her work," someone said in accented English. "She is the best. Your man. He will live." Clara's legs gave out then, all the fear and exhaustion crashing over her at once. She sat in the dust and wept, for relief, for Jake, for the long journey that had brought them here. When her tears finally stopped, she found herself surrounded by kind faces, pressed with water, food, and comfort. Through the open door, she could see the healer working over Jake, her movements confident and sure. "Señorita?" A young boy tugged at her sleeve. "The men who follow, they stop at the border. They watch, but they do not cross." Clara looked north, where dust marked the presence of their pursuers. Morrison and Creed might wait, might scheme, but for now, their reach ended at that weathered sign. She was free. They were free, as the sun set over this foreign land that would become their refuge. Clara kept vigil beside Jake's bed. His breathing was easier now, the fever broken, the wound clean and healing. When his eyes finally opened, clear and aware, she was there. "Clara?" His voice was weak but wondering. "We made it. We made it," she confirmed, catching his reaching hand. "Mexico, just like you promised. Together, together." Clara agreed, then gave in to what she'd wanted to do for days. She leaned down and kissed him, not on the forehead this time, but full on the lips, soft and sweet as their first taste of freedom. When she pulled back, Jake was smiling. "Took you long enough. Took us both long enough," Clara corrected. "But we have time now. All the time in the world." Outside, the Mexican night bloomed with music and laughter. The sounds of life lived without fear. And in a small adobe room, two exiles found what they'd been searching for all along. Not just freedom from their past, but freedom to build a future. The desert had tried to claim them. The law had tried to break them. But love had proven stronger than both. In the morning, they would begin planning that ranch Clara had dreamed of, with horses and gardens and peace. But tonight, they simply held each other and marveled at the gift of survival, of second chances, of finding home in the last place they'd expected, in each other's arms, the outlaw and the orphan, bound by choice rather than rope, writing their own law in a lawless land. Their story was just beginning, but already it was more than either had dared to hope for when this journey started with a girl left bound to die at dusk, and a mysterious stranger who'd stolen far more than a midnight kiss. He'd stolen her heart, and given his own in return. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed Clara and Jake's journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as our heroes connected across the harsh desert. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of adventure, romance, and the untamed frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Jake's story. Did you see that ending coming? What was your favorite moment? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own horizons.